Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So this video is not linked to any of the playlists that might come up in the future. However, this video is also very important because we will be covering tests and a test related to the method that invokes debounce under the hood. So let me explain the initial issue that I had. So the app is pretty simple, and as you can see, we have a text field, right? And then we can start typing in the text field. So let's say if you have a feature, and then whenever you type something in the text field, it would send a network request, get the data back, and then you would render that in the UI. However, there is a caveat there. In the field view model, we are using debounce here for the reason of not sending requests every time user inputs every character by pressing the keyboard. So if we put a breakpoint on line 26 and I start typing, as you can see, value gets emitted only after 0.5 seconds, which is like 500 milliseconds, right? And debounce states that it would it's the operator that would control the number of values and time between delivery of values from the upstream publisher. So in simple terms, it means that it would only emit the value if the user stops typing, and it would emit the value after 0.5 seconds, as we can see. If I comment out line 24 and run the app again, every time I start typing inside the text field, it would emit the value, as we can see in the debugger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like multiple times. Yeah, it emitted value multiple times, and we don't want that. We do not want to send billions of requests every time user types any character inside a text field, and we want to send the request only if user stops typing. So before we go into the actual test, let me explain the structure and like a setup that we're having here right now. So we're having a very basic field view controller, just like subclass of your view controller. It has a text field, and it also has a view model that we inject through a constructor. In the view.load, we would configure the view, a text for the subview, and then we would actually retrieve a publisher for our text field. So whenever a user types in inside the text field, notification center would post a UI text field text to change notification, and we would actually want to retrieve the notification along with the text field. We would compact map the object, which is any, and downcast it into our text field, get the text, and then bind it, let's say, to the view model's text publisher, and then we would invoke load data. So the view model's text publisher is just basically a current value subject which holds an empty string as an initial value, and whenever load data gets invoked, it would actually subscribe to the text publisher, which holds text, right? It would drop the first value to not send the request immediately because, as you can see, current value subject has its initial value, and we're now willing to send the request at that moment and only send request after user starts typing inside a text field. We would use debounce for 500 milliseconds inside the main run loop. We would flat map the text that we get and map the publisher into a new publisher. So loader is basically a closure that gets a string and returns any publisher, void and error. You can kind of treat this loader as a search endpoint, right? It would get some sort of a query parameter and would return you data back via publisher. And we are omitting sync in this example. So let's get into actual test. So I have a very basic test written here. As you can see, we have an SUT and loader. We create them via make SUT method. So in make SUT, we would use field factory, and field factory actually just instantiates entire object graph. We inject loader via method injection, which is basically the same signature, and it would return us the field view controller. We would create the view model with the loader. We would create the view controller with the view model and return the controller. Very basic stuff. If we go back to the test and make SUT, we would create a loader spy, and loader spy is actually just a test double that creates test publisher for you. Let's say we would create a pass-through subject and return it. We're not doing anything with it. However, we need to satisfy the compiler and return the publisher back. And the most interesting part here is that we're going to be capturing messages. So let's say if the user inputs like some sort of a query parameter in the text field, let's say he's searching for food, and we are willing to assert that if the user types something in a text field, we want to actually see that the loader receives that exact text from the text field. So now we just create our test setup, which is an SCTN loader. We invoke load view if needed. This is basically calling view.load from test. We could actually do it the other way as well by accessing view property on a view controller, but I believe load view if needed is more concise and kind of clearly indicates what's going on there. We would actually also set the text on the text field and then post a notification setter, post a notification to the notification setter with the text field that change notification, and we would pass our own text field. And the thing that we are willing to assert is that the loader receives the same text that we pass to the text field. So let me run a test. As you can see, test actually fails. And this is because debounce would reschedule the value to be emitted after 500 seconds. If I go to the field view model and comment out the debounce and come back to test, run it one more time, test is actually passing. But we don't want that. We actually want to preserve debounce because we're now willing to send billions of requests whenever a user starts typing in the text field. So the first thing that comes to my mind on how we could actually overcome this problem is to create a timer in test. So let me create a basic timer, schedule timer with 0.5 seconds. We're not willing to repeat it, get a timer back. Let's create an expectation. We would fulfill the expectation and wait for expectation. Let's say 1 second is enough. And let's try to run the test. Oh, test is actually passing because we are waiting 0.5 seconds for debounce to reschedule the time when the event would be emitted from the publisher, and then we would then check that loader received the message. However, if you look closely, a single test is taking 0.5 seconds, which is very slow for such a small test. It is super slow. Can you imagine if we had like 5, 10 tests? 10 tests would actually take 5 seconds. If you have hundreds of them, it would actually not scale in the long run. This is also flaky because timers might not behave as we expect sometimes on CI or on our own local machine sometimes. And if I go to the field view model, and what if 500 does not satisfy my needs and I try to change the value to 750, test is actually broken as well because expectation has been fulfilled, but value is not received. And we actually have to come back here and make it 0.75 for the test to pass again, which clearly states that test is following the structure of the code. However, we are willing to test everything through a public interface. Let's say we don't care if there is some sort of a debounce rescheduling mechanism working under the hood. We just want to set the text and post a notification and see that we receive something back. Let me revert this change, run the test one more time to make sure that it's failing. Yeah, it's failing, obviously. Let me revert this one as well. And I will now show you the nitty-gritty of this on how we can have super blazing fast tests and still have the debounce in production code. So let's do it. If we go to the debounce method, as you can see, debounce actually has a generic constraint S, and S is a scheduler. And as you can see, run loop's main instance is actually run loop. And as you can see, run loop conforms to the scheduler protocol. So the key idea here would be to inject a scheduler into our field view model so that we could replace with an immediate one in tests and use the run loop main in production. So let's start doing it. Oh, The problem here right now is that scheduler protocol defines a bunch of associated types with it, and you cannot hold reference to the protocol because it has a bunch of associated types. And the thing is that even though the compiler is helping us with using any here, it won't help because if I try to use it inside of runloop.main, compiler would not be happy because type any schedule cannot conform to schedule protocol. And the thing that can help us to bypass this problem is to also constrain our field view model to some sort of a type that also conforms to the scheduler protocol. And then we can use it instead of using the scheduler directly. And now we can use scheduler instead of the protocol with the associated type. However, the part that got broken is the field view controller, and as you can see, it also defines some sort of a scheduler protocol. However, we need to do the same thing because there's no other way to bypass this. Hopefully, Apple would add some type erasure for us, like in any publisher, and help in dealing with those situations. But for now, yeah, we need to keep doing it to bypass the problem. And as you can see, we would also constrain make field view controller method over scheduler, over generic constraint, which conforms schedule protocol, hold reference, inject the scheduler, and then pass it to the field view model. And we would just inject run loop main innocent delegate. So if we come back to the tests, as you can see, compiler would complain that we need to provide some sort of a scheduler type over field view controller, which defines a generic constraint. And so as we were talking in the beginning about using run loop main for production, we can actually use an immediate scheduler for tests. And if I open the docs, it says that you can only use the scheduler for immediate actions. If you attempt to schedule actions after a specific date, the scheduler ignores the date and performs them immediately. This is the exact behavior that we are willing to get, and we want to have tests blazing fast instead of rescheduling stuff after some time that we put in production. And for the scheduler that we get to inject into the make field view controller method, we can actually inject immediate scheduler shared instance. And if I run the test this time, it is passing. How cool it is. We just had to change a bit of code in production, but this is because of the types and associated types that relate to the protocol, but hopefully Apple would improve it in the near future. But as you can see, we can still have field view model. Let me open. As you can see, we can still have debounce and run tests and make them pass. If I run the app and see the behavior again, let me put the debugger and try to type. Debugger gets executed only after some time. And the bonus for those who stayed until the end, the thing that we should do when using notification center is not to use the default one, because if you would have multiple tests accessing default notification center and it would be posting multiple notifications, tests would have this global hidden state, and you don't want that. So to prevent that, we better inject the notification center, right? And I will provide a default value for this, and we can actually pass notification center to the make field view controller method. And I would pass it to the view controller as well. So instead of accessing the default one, we would be using our own that gets injected. However, we would still use default one in production, and we would use a test instance in our test. So if I use a center, we can actually create an empty one. And this would ensure that we don't have any state interdependency between tests. And yes, we have pretty blazing fast tests, 0.02 seconds, which scales pretty infinitely. You can write thousands of tests, and the time it would take for the tests to finish would not take that long. And as you can see, test is very clean, no timers. We just inject a immediate scheduler in tests to not have any rescheduling mechanism in tests, and still have the debounce with 500 millisecond delay in production. So I believe that will be it. We've covered a lot. Even though we've written a single test, we've covered a lot about schedulers, about using run loop main for production and using immediate scheduler for testing purposes. And this is the way how you can test the debounce in a clean way without any timers, slow tests. Tests are pretty fast, as you can see, 0.02 seconds. And this is it for this video, and thanks a lot for watching.